Welcome everybody. Good evening, and as I said, welcome. Today is August 10th, 2021. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Phil Santonzi. I'm the program chair for ASQ Section 1510 here in Southeast Florida. Welcome to this monthly presentation. If you'd like to know more about 1510, please feel free to check our site in the myasq.org website. Check the communities tab. And of course, look for ASQ Southeast Florida Section 1510. You can also join our LinkedIn group with the same name. This event is live and being recorded. As usual, we will upload the recording later to the ASQ 1510 YouTube channel. We will also, Ron has also provided his slides, PDF of the slides that he's going to use tonight, and we'll post that as well on the LinkedIn group. So during the presentation, we just ask that you please keep your audio muted until we open for questions and so on. At this point, I would like to introduce Steve Kramer, who's the chair of Section 1510. Steve?
Hi everybody, welcome. It's always great to see all your faces, some familiar, some not as much, and some names without faces, which works also. So it's great to see everyone. Welcome, and thanks for giving some of your time out to be with your colleagues. I also want to remind everyone that we're getting into what we call our election season for our 1510. So if you have interest in supporting your colleagues and joining the leadership of 1510, which can lead to all sorts of interesting things, with ASQ at not only the chapter level, but you can get it to the division level, the geographic communities, and all sorts of good stuff. So I want you to consider that, because we're all a bunch of volunteers, and so what you get is what you put in. So please always consider that. And I'm also the chair or the counselor for our student branch, and our next meeting will actually be in September, where we have an alumni event here at my house in Plantation. And we get our process improvement students that have graduated, as well as in the track, to come and try and join with fellowship and make their own connections. So it's all about connection. So welcome.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's go ahead then, and we'll introduce our speaker and his presentation about the state of cybersecurity relating to small and mid-sized businesses and some other things. Ron Frechette is the CEO and managing partner of GoldSky Cyber Security Solutions. He serves, I said, as the CEO. That's actually the chief evangelist officer for GoldSky. Over 10 years of experience directing security risk assessment engagements and developing cybersecurity plans for various size companies across North America. Known to many as the cyber coach, he's constantly studying emerging cybersecurity trends and shares his knowledge through blogging platforms, local publications, and speaking engagements across various industries. Ron's area of expertise has evolved from supporting large enterprise companies to helping small to mid-sized businesses with IT, security, and compliance needs. Ron's IT security and compliance career began in a consulting role as part of a HIPAA high-tech startup team at Coalfire Systems. You heard him mention Coalfire just a little while ago. Then selected as a director, Ron was offered the opportunity to commercialize the southeastern U.S. and Caribbean region. After 4 years' growth into a multi-million-dollar region led by the acquisition of Coalfire by the Carlyle Group in 2015, or led to the acquisition of Coalfire by Carlyle in 2015. Recognizing the growing demand for cybersecurity services in the small and mid-sized business world, Ron founded GoldSky to focus exclusively on these companies. Ron he's a fellow U.S. Coast Guard veteran and has been actively involved in Boy Scouts of America for the past 23 years, has a passion for giving back to his community through charitable organizations. His presentation tonight, as you can see on the screen, is the third-party risk and security vetting in the digital age. And you'll hear Ron address the state of cybersecurity as I said, in the small, mid-sized businesses, as well as the routes and the risk of threat by cyber attack. I welcome you, Ron. I think everybody else does too. Thanks for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Well, first and foremost, Phil, I've never had an intro like that. So thank you very much. Appreciate
Well,
that.
fellow coaster, you know how it is.
Semper Paratus. That's right. Love you for that.
Semper Paratus, right?
So first and foremost, good evening, ASQ, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come out and share a little bit of information with you to hopefully help me in my quest as the CEO of the company. And again, that would start it out as a joke. Yeah, Ron, you're the chief evangelist officer. Because when we started the company back in 2016, quite frankly, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, but there was nobody in the SMB world, or very little people. It was kind of in the innovator phase of adopting good cyber hygiene practices. So I was doing a lot of evangelizing, evangelizing my fanny off. But I got to tell you, there wasn't a lot of check writing going on, right? So the first 2 years that we started this company, it was really out of a passion. And I will tell you, I feel like I'm still in the military fighting this battle to save the SMB world from these cyber thugs. So when we come to work every day, we truly are passionate about this mission to educate, transform, and protect small and mid-sized businesses, not only from cybersecurity threats, but now you've got compliance mandates that if you're not compliant with, there's fines and penalties that we try to protect our clients from having to pay out. And then the privacy world is starting to really proliferate, right? With all these state privacy laws that we're starting to see. GDPR, right, is the big thing in the EU. And we're now seeing that at the federal level, we're looking at an Americanized GDPR privacy framework that will be here eventually. So again, as a fellow, as a cybersecurity evangelist, one of the things I try to do when I speak in front of people is ask you because one of my objectives is to go out and recruit fellow evangelists. So I'm going to ask you today, as the American Society for Quality, to, once you hear this, listen to it, please go out and evangelize, because you've got 103 different countries that you're in, I saw. And that is quite an outreach. So that's really compelling for me, because again, we wake up every day trying to figure out how can we educate, transform, and protect these SMBs. And ladies and gentlemen, they need it. They need it bad. All right, I'm not going to bore you with all that. We just went through it. All right, so my objective this evening, there's 3 major topics we want to cover. We're going to talk about this security vetting trend that we're seeing. Then I want to walk you through the top 10 security questions that you're going to see if you've ever received a cybersecurity questionnaire. Has anyone ever received, just show of hands maybe, one of these cybersecurity questionnaires? No? Okay, well, stay tuned. They'll be coming. I can assure you that. We'll talk to you about the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and then we're going to walk you through a couple of sample security risk assessment reports so that you can begin to see what they look like. And then the third area is really adopting a cybersecurity framework. We're going to go through Phil's favorite slide, your digital footprint, and then we'll talk about objectives for building a program, some self-assessment resources that are out there for free, because there's a lot of resources out there, and then we'll take some questions. All right, so what is driving this trend, right? Really, at the end of the day, these big, large enterprise companies, and when I was at Coalfire, it's interesting, we were just starting to see back in 2009, really the enterprise security company or enterprise companies beginning to adopt good cyber hygiene. Accenture, for instance, you wouldn't even find this as an agenda topic at a board meeting. And now, and the budgets were zero. And I think the last I looked at Accenture's cybersecurity budget, $600 million a year, right? So these big, large companies are investing a lot in cybersecurity. So their posture, their maturity level has really escalated. So that makes it difficult for these cyber criminals to infiltrate those networks, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to work their way down the supply chain and pick on the little guys. And so this is why we're starting to see a lot of data breaches happen in the small and mid-sized business world, right? So again, these cyber criminals, they're lazy by nature, and they're like, you know what, if I'm going to have to, figure out how to get past multi-factor authentication, all that, there's so many of these digital footprints flying around in cyberspace with no security controls, basically stock naked, that they're just going to wait, because it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So once they get one of those, then they're going to target them, right? And one of the breaches that we talk about is the target breach as far as third parties are concerned. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with what happened with the target breach, but they had an HVAC vendor that was responsible for controlling their AC in their stores in the evening. So they would, turn the air up when they were shut down so that it would save them money. Well, the IT people kind of left that port open all the time for them as a convenience factor. And eventually, a cyber group got in there and they waited, and then they started elevating privileges. And then all of a sudden, Target gets a call from the Secret Service saying, hey, we got about 5 million of your credit cards in the Russian, darknet. If you guys want them, just so you'll know. But it started from an HVAC vendor, right? So as more and more of these scenarios popped up, larger companies started saying, hey, we need to really start thinking about, what our vendors are doing. So this is why this trend has started. Wait a minute, I want to go back to this. Yeah, so what's happening now is, a lot of these small companies, their big clients are saying, hey, do you guys have a SOC 2 certification, or are you ISO certified? And if they're not, then they kind of put them on notice, and they're saying, well, we'd really like to see you start building a program or show us something that you're doing as a condition of actually doing business with them. So it's now we're beginning to see the beginning phases of practicing good cyber hygiene is really, and having a formal cybersecurity program in place is really more of a competitive advantage, right? So there was a study that came out by Opus and the Ponemon Institute. Ponemon's out of New York, and there was basically a third-party ecosystem risk study. It was done back in 2018. They used 1,000 CISOs out of the US and the UK. And really what they wanted to understand was, okay, what are the challenges that these companies are facing in protecting sensitive information, right, with their third-party vendors? And as far as third parties are concerned, it's important to point out, what is a third-party vendor, right? So we kind of spell that out for you here. It could be an IT service provider, a law firm, email providers, web hosting companies, any subsidiary of your organization, vendors or subcontractors. Some of the key findings of this report, and it was pretty alarming, right? 61% of the US companies said they had experienced a data breach by one of their vendors. 50% said they were even unaware if they had any safeguards in place, right? That's half of them. And then you had 75% that said they believe that third-party cybersecurity incidents are on the rise. And then 16% attested that they have effective third-party risk management solutions in place. So basically the conclusion was that third parties are one of the fastest growing risks to an organization's sensitive data, right? And again, if you look here, half of these companies are saying managing third-party relationship risks is a priority, right? So again, what has happened is with this study coming out and others, a lot of the auditors that are auditing the big, large enterprise companies, they're saying they're going in doing these security risk assessments for big companies saying, you guys look good, but let's take a peek at what our third parties look like. And this is what happened actually in September of 2018. We began to see a slew of these security questionnaires going out to these small businesses. And when they get them, and again, I don't mean to sound condescending, but by and large, most of these business owners can't even spell cyber, right? They're so busy trying to make a profit and, sell their widget or their services that they can't focus on anything else. And so as a result, they started sending out these security questionnaires. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. All right, so this slide here is, this is a formal notice of a data breach. This is actually a letter that was sanitized, that a company experienced a breach. And, you know, I don't know if you ever read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those habits is to begin with the end in mind. Well, this is me beginning with the end that you don't want to have in mind, okay? Because we never want to experience a breach and have to write one of these letters. But check this out. First sentence: data privacy for our clients is at the center of our mission at X Law Group, and we take seriously the confidentiality of the information we hold on your behalf. Next sentence: we regret to inform you that on September 1st of 2018, we confirmed an unauthorized intrusion into our computer system. We took immediate action and are working closely with forensic experts in the FBI to investigate and address the situation. What does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? We're talking about money, and this is bad money. You don't want to have to spend this money. That's why that $ is in red, right? While our investigation is ongoing, again, more money, right? We found evidence indicating that information such as client names, addresses, email addresses, dates of birth were potentially taken. In some cases, healthcare records or social security numbers may have also been taken. And I'll tell you that when you talk about what we call PHI or protected health information, that is like cyber gold to these cyber criminals. And the reason is because, remember, we were talking about credit card numbers and PINs earlier, right? Well, it's very easy. How often are we checking our, our bank accounts and our credit card information? Well, how often are you checking your claims history? So the shelf life of protected health information is usually a lot longer. And not only that, they can use it for a number of different things, right? Because they're getting the physician's ID number that for the ICD-10 codes that they're putting in. They get all this information. They'll set up these fraud schemes where they start billing insurance companies because they've got 1 million people, and they just start saying, you broke your leg, you had an eye appointment, this and that. And they just start, because the system is so large and bureaucratic, these cyber criminals are literally getting millions of dollars from these health insurance fraud schemes. It's crazy. Now, what does it say here? If you were a client of ours prior to July 2018, you may be affected. Our investigation is in its early stages, but we felt it was important to communicate. We regret any anxiety or frustration this causes you and are committed to supporting you. So then it gets into them having to mail letters, right? 1 year of free identity protection services, credit monitoring. And then down here, it talks about that we have this ongoing investigation, but they've established a dedicated call center. How much do you think that's costing a day, right? So this, I like to throw this out right up front because this is a letter that nobody wants to have to write, but this is reality in the digital age, unfortunately. Okay, so we talk about, remember we talked about cybersecurity adoption. This is that market bell curve I was talking about earlier. So we got into the game in 2016, right here. So you see that flat line? Remember I was telling you that was our revenues, and it really was, right? And then in 2018, all of a sudden, with this trend happening, we're starting to see early adopters come into play. So we're probably, a lot of people ask me, Ron, do you think COVID slowed this down, right? Maybe a little, but I don't think a lot. Because again, we talked about the remote workforces and this and that. And we actually had a client, a healthcare company that apparently, think about it was a hospital system. All the people going into the hospital in the height of COVID, right? Well, the federal government was still asking them for their HIPAA certification. And they were like, guys, are you kidding me? I mean, my hospital's being overrun by COVID people. You're asking me for this? And they said, you know what? You're right. We'll give you 90 days. So it didn't go away, right? So if you'll notice here, many of the small and mid-sized businesses are really still in the early adopter phase. And, we expect 2025 or so where it's going to kind of hit that critical, the peak. And then the late majority and the laggards, if you will be the ones that are being motivated because they got breached, they got lawsuits, there are companies, in jeopardy of not being around anymore, right? And they're getting fines and penalties. So what we try to tell our clients is, let's get on this side of the curve, right? Let's focus on thought leadership. Let's protect our brand. Let's have a market advantage, right? And let's focus on long-term growth and protecting our business, not losing it. So this particular slide is really more of a high-level overview. This was the World Economic Forum that came out with a report. They were talking about how, all of these industrial revolutions are, they really create a lot of innovation and in science and innovation. These are the main drivers of what thrusts a revolution forward. And this, like, if you look at steam and water when it came out in 1784, think about how that affected the economy and, how manufacturing, like I'm from Lowell, Mass, and all of our factories back then, shoe factories, were powered by water, right? And then all of a sudden you got electricity that came into play, and think about all the new innovation that was spawned now that you have these lights that you can just click a switch and they're on. And then all of a sudden PCs came into play. And then we have now these cyber physical systems. Now, everyone's trying to figure out, what do we even call this revolution? And so we've been calling it the digital age revolution. And this is where now, again, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's great to have that. But on the other side, the dark side, if you will, this is going to dramatically increase. Like if someone's doing a phishing attack, well, it's going to increase like by quantum leaps, right? And the same thing with artificial intelligence, because now they're going to be able to see trends. And like I said, there's a lot of good things, but there's a lot of bad things that this new stuff is doing. So again, we just need to be cognizant, right? We got to be educated on this stuff. All right. So let's walk through the questionnaire, right? So these are the 10 questions, and we're going to dive into each one of them throughout the presentation. So first question, do you have an information security policy, right? How often is it updated? Do you have an information security officer? Do you conduct annual security risk assessments? Are you conducting vulnerability or penetration testing of your network? Do you have an access privilege policy? Do you have a third-party service provider policy? Do you perform annual security awareness training? Is your data encrypted in transit and at rest? Can you provide a copy of your disaster recovery or business continuity plan? And do you have an incident response plan? And are you testing it, and are you updating it on an annual basis? So it's funny, with an information security policy, a lot of people, when I show this slide, they're like, oh, it's 2.5 pages. That's not too bad, Ron. And I'm like, no, this is the table of contents. Okay. So this is a journey. It's not a destination. When you decide that you want to start really focusing on practicing good cyber hygiene, it's a program. You've got to change. It's that transformation that I talked about earlier. It doesn't happen overnight. And there's a lot of things that go into this. But again, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So this is, you get your maturity posture will increase over time if you have a program in place. But this is the number one question that they're going to ask you. Do you have an information security policy in place? And again, these little resources here, and you'll see there's hyperlinks. So when Phil sends you the deck, you can actually click on this, and there's free resources that'll actually give you a template for an information security policy. And then Certikit is another one, but I think there's a fee for this one that gets a little bit more granular. But again, these are great resources for you and your teams as you're looking to build out your information security programs. All right, as far as information security officer, right? Do you have one that's qualified for the role? Well, if you don't, you should probably appoint somebody in-house. And if they're not educated, get them educated. Now, what we see a lot in the small business world is the IT person is usually the cousin of the partner or the brother that was a real avid gamer. And so because they know how to, they end up becoming the IT guy, but they really are not educated at all. So you got to get them educated. You could hire an information security officer, I will tell you, it's very expensive. These guys or gals are probably coming in about 150 to 175 base salary. If it's a chief security officer, you're talking 200 plus, right? And they usually want some type of equity package as well. Or you can outsource this to a security consulting firm, what they call virtual chief security officer services for a fraction of the cost, right? The third question is, do you conduct annual security risk assessments? So this is, again, I don't want to dive into too much detail on this, but these are really the steps when you're walking through a security risk assessment. First thing we got to do is we got to classify all of our sensitive information. And then the other thing we got to do is figure out where is it within our infrastructure. It's amazing how we'll do scans and we'll see credit card data and all kinds of crazy stuff that should not be in an IT infrastructure, right? We also want to perform inventories, right? We want to know where our data is. We want to footprint our organization's IT structure. We want to assess it from the outside in. We want to think like a hacker when we're looking at our infrastructure. And then we want to do what we call a NIST 830 qualitative security risk assessment. This means that we're looking at the likelihood of an impact, or excuse me, the likelihood of an event happening and what would be the impact, right? And determine what the risk level is of that within our own organization. And then once we do that, we can decide on which security controls that we want to cover based on our highest risk areas, right? Then we want to schedule the implementation of all these controls. We've got to get them in place, repeat as changes are made. So we want to do a formal, you want to do this on an annual basis, or if you have a major infrastructure change. Now, some of our clients, because, and again, it's all about risk appetite, right? What is your risk tolerance? Some of our clients say, Ron, I know the best practice is every year, but we're going to do it every other year, right? So that's fine. But again, they've accepted that risk and they've evaluated. And then this is really just the NIST 830 risk assessment methodology steps in the process of how you would go through one of these qualitative risk analyses. And then this is something I like to throw out. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the National Institute for Standards and Technology, but a lot of these other frameworks you may be familiar with. Like we were talking about PCI earlier. So the PCI Security Standards Council, if you look at their compliance framework, a lot of it is really based on the NIST framework. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology is a federal agency. And what they'll do is they will build all of these special publications like NIST 830, 853 as a catalog of security controls that they recommend that their federal agencies adopt. And then what will happen is by default, the private sector will pick that up, if that makes sense. So NIST is the mothership, if you will. And then PCI, HIPAA, this is the Criminal Justice Information System, FedRAMP, CMMC, that's a big one. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. It's really more for federal sub and prime contractors. Graham Leach Bliley is banking, but every industry just about out there has some type of compliance framework that if you're not in compliance with, you have the risk of fines and penalties or being disbarred or what have you. And then a risk assessment report. It's important. I want to point this out because a lot of we're hearing from a lot of our small mid-sized business clients that they've done risk assessments in the past, but they've only looked at their technology stack, right? And it's important to understand that there's 4 threat vectors that we need to look at or assess when we do a security risk assessment. Yeah, technologies is certainly one of those, but you've got people, processes, and facilities as well. So if you're ever looking to have someone do this for you, make sure that they're doing a full-fledged security risk assessment, not just looking at your technology stack, because they've only covered 25% of your the digital footprint, if you will. And this is just kind of a snapshot of what I was talking about as far as likelihood versus impact, right? So this threat event, for instance, would be phishing attacks, right? What would be the threat source of a phishing attack? Well, it's going to be an external adversarial. And then the vulnerabilities and the predisposing conditions. Not all the employees are trained. So these are things that were noted, that we noted when we did interviews during the risk assessment. Again, this is actually an SRA we did, but it's sanitized, right? Mitigating controls. What do they have in place that would decrease the risk? They had basically antivirus, right? That comes with your machine. So the likelihood of the event initiation is very high. The likelihood of the event succeeding is high. So the overall likelihood is very high. The level of impact of successful is very high. So the calculated risk becomes very high. And then this would be, so that's a security risk assessment. But then if we talk about a compliance gap assessment, right? This is a CMMC compliance gap analysis. And you can see, that after looking at all the controls that were in scope, 47% of the controls were actually in place, which is really good, by the way. Usually we see a lot of purple or yellow when we do these. So this group was actually in pretty good shape. 34% partial, 18% non-compliant. And then what will happen is you will get, as part of this security risk assessment, you should receive a remediation roadmap. So in other words, all those vulnerabilities or gaps that we identified, this remediation roadmap should provide you with a step-by-step approach to closing those gaps so that you don't need to hire anyone to do it. If you've got the skills on staff, once you receive that remediation roadmap, you give it to your security team and they start focusing on closing those gaps. And they're usually listed as, these are probably the more critical, these are your short range, and these are mid-range. And then we usually have a strategic roadmap as well. The other thing that a lot of our clients—
Ron, this is Phil. Before you go on that 2 slides back, you had the previous one. Yeah, and then the gap analysis. Yeah. Oh, actually, I think it may have been the one before that. But when you look at all these headings on the columns, what about, there's a question about the detectability, in a FEMA, failure mode and effect analysis that's typically done. It includes also how detectable is this threat, if it does happen. Is anything like that considered in these analysis reports?
Absolutely.
In these analyses?
So do they have a security incident and event management system in place, right? A SIM. Many of these small businesses don't have these controls in place. Or do they have intrusion detection, IDS, IPS, right? Do they have that in place? And again, by and large, because of that, we're still in the early adopter phase. A lot of these small, mid-sized businesses don't have those controls in place. So we help them start, working towards getting those controls in place. Is there another question before we move on?
Well, no, that was the question. It was around the detectability issue. How detectable is the threat, and what is that considered in this analysis? That's it.
Again, it depends on the level of controls that you have in place, right?
Yeah.
And Phil, please stop me. Yeah, like you just did, if there's questions, because that's really good.
Okay.
All right. So this is, again, a letter that a lot of our clients will say, hey, listen, I'm really getting a lot of pressure, from my big client because of that security questionnaire I got. And I just want to let them know that I've engaged a cybersecurity company. Can you just write a letter and tell them that you did this? Absolutely. So we'll do these letters. Again, this is not an attestation or anything. It's just saying, hey, we did this. And this is, so it's a very generic type letter, but it does give our clients a lot of breathing room because their bigger customers see that they're actually taking action and moving their security program forward. All right, so this is really focused. This is question 4, right? Are you doing annual vulnerability or penetration testing, right? So again, I'm going to try to move quickly here, guys, if you don't mind. So again, there's a lot of confusion out there in the marketplace about what is a vulnerability assessment versus what is a penetration test, right? A lot of people think that a penetration test is actually a vulnerability assessment, and it's not, right? So, and I try to liken this to, let's say that tonight we decided we're going to get into the home intrusion burglary business, okay? So we're going to go to a neighborhood and we're going to start looking at houses. We're walking down the sidewalk. All of a sudden we see this house and it's got ADT security signs. You can see the cameras. You can see everything is locked down. What's the likelihood that we're going to probably try to infiltrate that house? Probably not likely, right? But the next house that we go to, we look up, we see that the garage, right, window is unlocked. We look around the side, we see that the side door is unlocked, and we see that there's some windows that are unlocked. So now we're thinking, oh, we could get in there, we could get in there, we could get in here. That is a vulnerability assessment. All we've done is assess where we could potentially infiltrate or exploit into that house. The second that we say, all right, let's go, and we go to that side door and open that door and go in that house, now that is a penetration test. Because now that we're in the house, now we're going to try to find, you know, the jewels, right? The safe, the jewels, the money, try to get all the valuable stuff that we can while we're in there out. That is a penetration test. So vulnerability assessment is just assessing where the potential vulnerabilities are. Once we know what those vulnerabilities are, then we're going to try to penetrate and exploit and get the keys to the kingdom. Does that make sense to everyone? It's very, very important. Okay, so that's a question. Are you conducting vulnerability and or penetration testing? And then one other sidebar note here is if you're doing a penetration test, like a network penetration test, usually the pen test company, they're going to scan the environment and do a vulnerability assessment as the first phase. And then they're going to identify where all the vulnerabilities are, and then they're going to go in and exploit, if that makes sense. And these are just some different scanning vendors that you could actually invest in if you wanted to do your own scans on your own environment. All right, question 5, do you have an access control policy? Again, access controls, this is all about if we were to be able to infiltrate a network or an infrastructure, is it a flat network? In other words, do we get the keys to the kingdom once we're in there? Or do you have all your sensitive data segmented and firewalled off because, you know, it's sensitive data? So we want to make them work. If they're going to get into our system, we practice what we call defense in depth, right? We're at every level of that OSI model, and there's 7 layers. You want to make sure that you've got proper security controls in place, because again, going back to the, you know, the burglary analogy, if we're seeing that all these controls are in place, you know, all these things that we're probably going to get busted or we're not going to get in, why even do it? I'm just going to go to the low-hanging fruit, right? Again, these are, you got to have the need to know, the need to use. These are all things you need to consider when you're building an access control policy. And again, these resources here, free, paid, will help you have those templates. You have a third-party service provider security policy. Again, you've got to develop that plan. You've got to build a due diligence process. You got to have a reporting system in place. You've got to do continuous monitoring of these third-party vendors. You know, one thing you can do is ask them, are you guys SOC 2 certified, right? Do you have an ISO certification? Usually if they have that, that tells us they're fairly mature from a cybersecurity program management standpoint. And do you have a termination process, right? So if we're finding that this company that we're working with is exposing us to vulnerabilities that could hurt us, do we have a process to terminate that relationship? Question 7, do you perform annual security awareness training, right? So again, this is all know before. There's all kinds of vendors out there. We do our own here at GoldSky when we do phishing exercises, because our clients, you know, they're all, we call them snowflakes. They all have individual little nuances. And so we want to make sure that we're asking or sending industry-specific phishing emails that will be hard for someone to determine whether or not it's easily fake, right? So it just makes it a little bit more challenging. And that's just all of us out there evangelizing, right? Question 8, is your data encrypted in transit and at rest? Again, I'm not going to get into, real granular about what is actually email encryption, but you guys can see this on the slide deck when you get it. Digital Guardian is actually a really good vendor that we have vetted and we think has a good program. And there's also a group out there called, I'm trying to find it here. It's called Trustify, and it's one-click encryption. So the beauty of this is if you've ever received an encrypted email, basically what happens is you have to put a username and a password in, right, in order to get signed up. Well, the nice thing about Trustify is it's one-click encryption, it's military grade, and as soon as you receive that encrypted email, you can open it right up, and then whatever you send out, everything is encrypted after that. So we're big fans of Trustify, and we use it here at GoldSky. All right, any other questions? We're good? I don't see the chat. All right, good. All right, question 9, can you provide a copy of your incident response and business continuity plan? And again, ladies and gentlemen, this one here, when you talk about incident response and the procedures, we have resources here at GoldSky that only do incident response, right? This is what, and you can actually get a certification in this because there's a lot to it. And again, with every client having different nuances, you've got to really put your environment under the microscope to really have a good incident response and business continuity plan in place. And again, these types of templates you can find in these resources. And then the last is, do you have a disaster recovery plan in place? Again, this is just a template that you can see. And again, you've got to assemble the plan, identify the scope, appoint your contacts that everyone is going to reach out to in an emergency. You got to have a recovery team, a disaster recovery team. Everyone has to have roles and responsibilities, right? We have to assign that. And then you want to be able to restore and do data backups. And then you want to test and get maintenance as a final step there. And again, you can find them at these resources. This is, again, this talks about privacy a little bit. This is getting into the Florida Information Protection Act. And you're going to start seeing some other privacy laws come out if they haven't already. Actually, I've been waiting on this. But FIPA is the Florida Information Protection Act here in the state of Florida. And again, I'm not going to dive into the dirty details of this because of time's sake. But you can see that just for us alone, we have our own privacy laws here in Florida. Then you got California, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and then there are a bunch of others that are adopting them as we speak. All right, so the last section here is adopting a cybersecurity framework. Okay, so this is Phil's favorite slide. So I'm a visual kind of learner myself, and one of the things that we learned quickly when we got into the small business space is that, again, most of these people can't spell cyber. So I wanted to visually illustrate for non-technical people what a digital footprint looks like in cyberspace, right? So what we decided to do is, remember, every time you hit that send button on any of your devices, your IP address is sending packets of data to one of these digital footprints, and there's literally hundreds of millions of these things flying around at any given time in cyberspace, and it's sending packets of data to a digital footprint that you've chosen to send it to. It could be your bank, could be a client, whoever it is, right? So, and they all come in shapes, they come in all different shapes and sizes. These big guys could be, Amazon Web, and these little guys could be us. So let's take one and put it under the microscope. So we look at the lock in the middle there. This is where all of our sensitive data resides that we're trying to protect, right? You've got this circle. This is what we call our security perimeter. So this is where we want to put all those controls that we talked about earlier. And then these lines around the security perimeter represent ingress and egress points, data and people constantly coming in and out of your network, right? So there's the hoodie guys, right? These are the guys or the gals that are trying to get into our network. How are they trying to infiltrate our stuff? they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at us, right? I mean, we've got brute force attacks, malware, ransomware, worms, viruses, you name it. Again, with AI and machine learning, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these Trojan attacks, right? So remember we talked about those 4 threat vectors? So let me walk you through that now. The first one are your people, right? So how aware are your employees of all of these malware variants coming at them on a daily basis? And just so you know, last year there was an average of 150,000 malware variants like these being launched into cyberspace on a daily, and I want to say that again, daily basis, right? So how aware are your people of all these malware variants coming at them at a daily basis? How do they behave when they're confronted with one? Are they a defense or a liability? And then processes. So this starts at the top. How aware is management of this transformation that's happening in the digital age? Start practicing good cyber hygiene. Do you have formal policies and procedures in place? And have you customized them for your specific environment? We talked about facilities. So this is if you have a server on-prem, is it under lock and key? You have a camera on it 24/7, 365. You have the proper access controls in place. And then technologies, again, if someone were to be able to infiltrate your network, will they get the keys to the kingdom? Or is there going to be defense in depth inside of here? So they really got to work hard to get that credit card data or that PHI or that client data. Applications, are you patching? Email, we talked about that. Are you vetting your cloud mobile service providers? Do you have firewalls in place and do you have just basic AV? You would be amazed at how many of our customers they have antivirus, but they just never turned it on because they didn't know they had it, right? It's just crazy. So if we look at this security perimeter, you see all this black space. These are the gaps that I was talking about earlier when we do that security risk assessment. These 4 threat vectors, our goal is to come in, do a full-fledged qualitative risk assessment, which will uncover these gaps for us. Now we can focus on closing those bad boys, right? So really the question I'll leave you with on this slide is, how secure is your digital footprint? You might want to start thinking about that, right? Okay, so primary objectives really for building a cybersecurity program, there's 3. First thing we want to do is avoid getting breached. Then we want to achieve compliance with the specific frameworks that we need to be in scope to comply with. And we want to do it, especially with the SMBs, as affordably as possible. So how do we do it, right? What's the right approach? Again, it's all about risk at the end of the day. We have to evaluate, identify, and manage our risk. And we have to decide what is our risk tolerance, right? Some companies have very little risk tolerance because of the sensitivity of the data that they hold on behalf of their clients. But some, you know what, if it's PII, not too much of a big deal. You know what, I'll take the risk. I'll take the hit if we get hit, right? Okay, so again, when we got into this space and these people, again, couldn't spell cyber, we were like, all right, how do we really boil this stuff down to make it easy to understand and easy to implement, right? So that these cyber thugs, right? Remember that digital footprint? So we developed a cyber risk management system exclusively for the small and mid-sized business world. And it's 5 phases. The first phase is you have to diagnose that digital footprint like we talked about. Once you diagnose it, now we've got to remediate, which is phase 2. And then once we develop that remediation plan and determine the most cost-effective solution to close those gaps, now we're going to have to engage some managed security service providers, right? We've got to put that plan into action. So Phil, the earlier question about, how will you know if you have a SIM in place, security incident and event management system? In many cases, our clients, they say, we got to get a SIM. So now we've got to help them go out and really go through the bidding process and get the most cost-effective solution for their environment. That's an example of engaging a managed security service provider or implementing email encryption, right? And then we're going to give that plan a little bit of time to work. And phase 4 is now we want to audit that remediation plan, and we want to check and do some testing on that security perimeter and make sure that the action that we took closed those gaps. And now what we want to do is look at our residual risk. What's the risk that's left over, right? And then we have to make some decisions. Do we want to continue to mitigate that risk? Do we want to transfer that risk, which would be through like cyber insurance, right? Do we want to accept the risk? And then phase 5, and we say you're golden when you're at phase 5. This is when we have you at a point where your maturity level is optimized. You're monitoring your endpoints 24/7, 365. And what we tell our clients is that this is, again, it's a journey, not a destination, right? So this should be an annual life cycle, right? You should be doing this on an annual basis, or if you have a major infrastructure change. So again, what's funny about this cyber risk management system, it took us a couple of weeks to whiteboard this out. And then after we were done, and I swear this was by accident, we were looking and going, oh my God, it spells dream, right? And our first thought was, that's cheesy, right? We're like, no, that's cheesy. Dream. And so we started socializing it out to our clients, and they loved it. Everyone's like, are you going to have the dream team come in and do our risk assessment, right? And so all these funny, cheesy jokes started. So we actually took and converted this to our Dream Secure Cyber Risk Management System, and we have a patent pending on it right now. So we're real excited about that. But again, some of the key benefits, and this is all based on NIST, right? Again, they're the mothership. So we use the NIST 853 security controls. And again, I want to emphasize it's a journey, not a destination. All right, so in closing, these are some of those self-assessment resources, right, that I was telling you guys about. Center for Internet Security, or CIS, is also a great resource that you can get a lot of free information. And other than that, I'll open it up to questions.
Well, thanks, Ron. Thanks very much. Any questions? A couple of questions for you, Ron. What are the elements of cyber hygiene? You know, what does that mean? I sort of understand what it is when you say it, but how would you describe it? What are the elements of cyber hygiene? Does it have to do with that questionnaire or what?
Well, if you take those top 10 questions that they're asking, if you're doing all those things, guess what? You're practicing good cyber hygiene. Multi-factor authentication is one that I would highly, highly recommend to everybody on this call and everyone that I speak with, right? There's also like, you can use a token device, right? That changes every 2 minutes. I use that for my banking. So cyber hygiene, Phil, is really just basic, having basic security controls in place that, again, what you don't know won't hurt you. That's baloney. What you don't know will hurt you. And what we're finding is, think about dental hygiene, right? If you didn't brush your teeth, we'll put that paste on the brush to do that, right? What would happen? Well, you'd be in a lot of pain and you wouldn't look so good. Well, guess what? Cyber hygiene is that tenfold, okay? So again, it's detriment. And this is why I get very passionate about this stuff and why I'm trying to recruit all of you to say, you know what? We need to practice good cyber hygiene and start sharing that with you.
Okay, I've got another question here. Almost everybody's using, or a lot of people and companies are using Microsoft 365. Is that, good preemptive? Is it encrypted? Does it help in any way, or are there other things that have to be done?
Yeah, there's different levels of Office 365. For instance, CMMC, right? You can't use Office 365. You've got to use an elevated version of it, right? But I would say by and large, you've got TLS now and all this. So most of your emails just through Google and everything are encrypted, but they're not, there's still the likelihood that a cyber thug, because it's not the most tightest encryption on the planet, right? Could, access information if they were to perform a man-in-the-middle attack.
How about what role does VPN play in this, or what role can it play in the cybersecurity area?
Yeah, so virtual private networks are awesome, right? So think about the World Wide Web in cyberspace, okay? It's really wide open, and there's you can see everything out there, right? When you have a virtual private network, it's basically a tunnel that's going from one area to another area that nobody else can see, right? And again, if these cyber criminals, if they targeted you and they knew that you had a VPN, could they infiltrate your virtual private network? Yeah, it's not, it's not impossible, but virtual private networks are basically tunnels from one IP address to another that allows you to communicate with that one person, and nobody else in the World Wide Web can see that that is happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Highly, highly effective. All right. So I know I just dumped a lot on you guys, and it's the end of the day. So I know your brains are probably fried and you're like, oh my God, is this thing over yet? Right. Because this stuff can be, a little laborious, if you will. But I always like to leave my audiences with this, right? Remember, the passwords are like underpants. You got to change them often. You got to keep them private and never share them with anyone.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. Thanks very much for coming and joining us tonight and providing us all this information. It's always scary, but there's always hope, whenever you talk about cybersecurity.
It's not rocket science, and I hope through the presentation you guys think, well, all you got to do is just do it, right? That's the challenge, is getting people to take action and get that transformation going on.